Hello and welcome to BAM on FS Science. Today we are talking about a really important topic, which is gender studies at the university, the challenges that we will confront in this field, and also women in politics here in Salzburg, in Europe, and also beyond. We have with us the professor Zoe Lefkofridi and also the Dr. Vera Beloshitzkaya. Both of them are researchers working on critical topics, projects such as pushback lash and studies on women in politics here in Salzburg. Welcome to BEM.
Thank you for the invitation.
We would like to start with that you can explain what is gender studies and why it's so important nowadays.
Gender studies. So we have some questions that we want to answer. Like, for example, the other day, school children came to my office and they interviewed me for the newspaper Plaudertasche, which is a children's newspaper in Salzburg. And they asked me, why does a female skier earn less than a male skier? So we need an answer to this question. You need gender studies. Another question is like, why do we have fewer women in parliament than men? Or why do we have fewer female prime ministers? Why do women earn less in many sectors, not just in sports? So in order to answer these questions, you need to conduct a study, a scientific study with a methodology and collect evidence in order to be able to answer this question. So in order to have an explanation. So gender studies is an academic field that is trying to understand the phenomenon of inequality, gender inequality, and more recently also intersectional inequality. So looking not just between men and women, but also people that are in different categories of marginalization and exclusion, like, for example, a black woman or a disabled man, or a migrant, a Muslim woman. So different categories that intersect and to try to understand why, for example, they earn less, why we don't see them in parliament, why don't we see them at universities, why aren't they our professors? Because also nowadays at universities, also in Austria and in many other countries, women are still not half of the faculty members, the way they are also not half of the members of parliament. So this is a big question, why? Why aren't women as many as men in all these different professions? So that's one of the questions that gender studies is pursuing. So it's a field that is interdisciplinary. So you cannot answer this question just by taking one disciplinary path. For example, I'm a political scientist, and I study politics, political institutions, parliaments, elections. But in order to understand why there are fewer women in parliament, you also need to look at other factors. For example, how the family is structured, what is happening within the household. So you have sociology and history and psychology and cultural studies. So it is an interdisciplinary field. So a lot of different disciplines meet, but have one area where they are all interested in gender inequality. And they also pursue an overall goal, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to address a problem and find a solution. So the way in the medical profession, doctors, we have the human body and there is a disease. And we are trying to, first of all, detect it, to see the disease, and then understand what has caused it in order to heal it. So in a very similar manner, social sciences is, like, so to say, is able to identify problems and propose solutions for social problems. So gender studies is coming out of the humanities and the social sciences, but it is a topic that affects and concerns all the disciplines. For example, gender medicine is nowadays also developing. So it is a topic that concerns how society, how humans function and behave. So you can approach it from many different perspectives, but at the end of the day, it is a topic that you cannot ignore. Otherwise, the science you produce is deficient, it's flawed.
And how is the environment for gender studies research at the university?
So this is let me tell you a story. Let's start with Salzburg. In the 70s, there was a historian, Erika Weinzierl, who had a seminar about the social and political position of Austrian women. Let's recall that around that time, women had to ask for the permission of their husbands in order to work. So she was the first professor of history, I think, in the entire country, and remained for a long time the only one. So she had this seminar at the University of Salzburg about the position of women, and she used both quantitative and qualitative data to show how was the life of women, whether they were working, how much they were working, how much they were earning, their rights. So that was one of the first pioneer gender studies projects here in Salzburg. And that was 50 years ago. So you would expect that we would have, gender studies in every faculty of the university, that gender studies would have, that the university would have invested a lot of resources, since actually the University of Salzburg was a pioneer place where this, the study of gender was conducted. However, nothing happened for a very long time until there was a law, the University Act of 2002. Yeah, so again, like over 20 years ago, every university in Austria was obliged to create a unit for the coordination of gender equality policies, women's promotion, and gender studies, gender research. Gender studies concerns teaching with this focus and research with this focus. And in the statute of our university, for about 20 years, there was a clause, that gender research is very promoted and there should be a professor, but this was never materialized. So if that answers your question, partly because everything was on paper, the framework was there, the law wanted it, but there was no political will. So the administrations, the rectorates were not interested in promoting this type of knowledge. And if it doesn't happen, from the political, leadership of a university, it is very hard, because there were a lot of researchers that were trying to establish gender studies. Now we have in Salzburg the Athena Center, where we both belong, the Athena Center for Intersectional Research. So they have been trying to establish a center like this for about 3 decades. Yes, so it was just founded, and the situation with gender studies is unfortunately not, it's not yet sustainable. So I am the first professor of gender studies in the entire state of Salzburg, so not only at the University of Salzburg. So we still have a lot of, so there is a lot of things that could happen if we really wanted to promote gender studies. There is a lot of potential. We have 3 Horizon Europe projects. We're globally established. So it is a matter of political will what will happen now, because until now, gender studies has not been supported. So it has not been equivalent to other disciplines. So at the end of the day, if the political leadership of the university today wants to show that all human beings are equal, and the research that concerns also all those human beings, is considered, equally valued and equally promoted, it's in their hands. So until now, we have not seen it. It is a very slow progress with what we have observed. We are very hopeful, we are positive. We think that it is possible to establish gender studies as an equivalent field, but we have not seen it until now. It's not sustainable. What we have right now is something that if the political leadership higher up, like the government or the EU leadership changes, we do not have sustainable infrastructure, and we don't have, it could just all collapse. It's on a very thin basis, and it's also based on the contributions of individual people rather than a commitment, an institutional commitment. So to sum it up, gender studies is a very, very visible and successful field at the University of Salzburg, and it has yet to receive the recognition it deserves.
So, as I understand, it doesn't, it's not taken that serious as we expected. I mean, because you don't receive enough fundings, but in the other way, you have like a lot of backup of people like putting like all the effort to maintain this, no? Maybe I'm wrong, Ed.
No, you're right. So basically, recognition and appreciation is reflected in resources, right? So the more a university invests in a field, the more important it is for the leadership. So what we have seen does not reflect this, but things are changing, and there is hope, because I need to also underline the importance of this field for democracy, which is in this very context. I mean, look at the US, what is going on, look at many other parts of the world. Democracies are outnumbered by autocracies. So we are in a context where democracy is under threat. And gender equality is also co-constitutional to democracy, because in modern democracy, because democracy is a system that is based on political equality, if you don't have gender equality, you don't have political equality, so you don't have democracy. So that's why if political leaderships and university leaderships are interested in democracy, the first thing that they need to support is gender studies.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to mention, because I understand it's an important topic, but and they need to be like fundings for this. Yeah. But sometimes it's like, okay, we want to show that we have these gender studies, but we don't support it because, that's what I mean. I know I don't know if I'm messing or something, but it's what I feel that it happens, and it's what I understood.
It is not just in Austria, though. We have to say that Austria has at least gender studies in the law. It is in the Organization of Research Law, Forschungsorganisationsgesetz, and it's also in the University Act. So it is, in a way, constitutionalized. It's in the written, set of legislation. But what we need is implementation. So we need the political will, because often there is a lot of, legislation that is really not taken seriously. So for me, it's very simple. If women are considered human beings, then the work that is being done to, we basically had to prove it, that women are human beings and that they deserve equality. For example, gender studies has produced a lot of evidence about the impact of including women in politics. That's our field, politics and gender. So we have really very specific outcomes when you include women in politics. So not only on the agenda and policy outcomes, but also in the quality of the discussion. There is a study by my former doctoral student, Sarah Dingler, about the Austrian parliament. So the sentiment, so the way they speak in the parliament, the more women, the more constructive the discussion. So you have very, very specific outcomes. So we have proven that the inclusion of women in the public sphere, in the economy, in companies, in politics is beneficial. We have also shown what are the obstacles? What is there? Stereotypes, structural barriers. So this knowledge needs to be taken seriously, and it needs to be supported because society is evolving. So it's not that, if you have evidence from the 70s, you also need evidence from now. So it is something, as I said, it is like medical doctors are healing bodies, gender studies can help heal societies.
And nowadays, you said that you feel like so positive for this, like how it's called, like development, and also the society is developing, so it needs to develop all of this. But how it's going in Europe, the politic, do you think that this will maybe stop this the development?
So first of all, I need to clarify that gender studies is not only about women.
Yeah.
So it also includes men and masculinities. And for a long time, politics has been focused on what women should change in order to fit into the world where they did not previously belong, like politics, for example, or universities, academia. Now, our focus in gender studies is also on what men do, because what we see is that women have proven they can do everything. But what has not happened is to also have a parallel development, a conscious development on the part of men. Many men, of course, they have evolved and they reject traditional gender roles, for example, that they are just the breadwinners and they need to work and they have nothing to do with care. And young men reject this because they want to, many of them want to spend time with their families and with their kids. Plus, science has shown that spending time with their kids is good for their well-being and they're happier. So we have a lot of scientific evidence showing us that departing from that model is beneficial also for men. But we need more focus on how to first have men understand this and also redefine themselves in this context. So to have like other definitions and understandings of masculinity besides that old traditional outdated model of masculinity.
Thank you. Now let's talk about the project that you are doing the research on, the pushback lack. Can you explain me a bit? Sorry, pushback lash. Can you explain me a bit how is it the project?
Yes, I'll take it. This question. So
we have a graphic. So also this graphic explains a bit, but
yes, because it's quite complex and yet it's very simple to understand. So Pushback Lash project brings together 11 partners and multiple disciplines, especially to support Zoe's point. We worked with psychologists, sociologists, theater studies, and also political scientists to really understand who, why, and how objects to gender equality, and then how do these objections manifest themselves in what you see here in public opinion, and then also in party discourses, in legislation, and also online. And what's more important, the project focused on devising some solutions. The particular strength of the project was its diverse methodologies. As Zoe explained, methodologies is how we construct a study to be able to answer our research question in order to then see that we can trust the findings. So scientific studies, and the project is not an exception, is about not just opinions, it's about systematic collection of data to answer the research question and then making procedures very, very explicit so other scholars and society can verify the conclusions and the findings. So we call it creating evidence. So the project aimed at creating evidence and documenting all the attacks against gender equality, but also democracy. And the particular part, another particular part, the project was innovative in many ways. It was Zoe's baby. What was really cool beyond multiple methodologies, beyond using rigorous scientific methods and its multidisciplinarity, was also focusing on solutions, and solutions from many different perspectives. So, for instance, we had a team that devised survey experiments because we really wanted to understand which interventions work the best. And interventions of how can we, for instance, and what do we do when people, for instance, express sexist attitudes. And in this case, we used survey experiments. But on the other hand, the project engaged with theater of the oppressed. So it showed that attacks against gender equality and democracy do not exist in a vacuum. They exist in our bodies, in how we think about things. And this embodied experience that needs to be taken into consideration when we work through solutions and finding solutions of how to unpack it and then hopefully fight against it. So to sum it up, it was a huge project funded by the European Union. It involved people from multiple disciplines. It studied the connection between gender equality and democracy, but also attacks on gender equality and democracy at different levels, from citizens' understandings to party and legislative levels to then online discourses. And it used rigorous scientific methods to study these questions.
Okay. And what are the key findings so far, resistance to gender equality?
I will do three, and then Zoe, whatever she thinks is important. So the findings are multiple, and they're really, really cool, and I invite everybody to go to pushbacklash.eu website and explore all the findings and toolkits that we produced, also the wonderful cartoons. But I want to highlight three things. I think thinking about institutional level or the level of legislature, in Europe in particular, we don't see this drastic legislation reversals in most cases on women's rights, similar to what we see in the United States, for example, where rights are taken away, like reproductive rights, for instance, or where gender studies are being defunded. In the US, it's always connected to diversity and equality paradigm, but it's the same. So we don't see it. In Europe, it's very incremental, and it's usually at the implementation level. Very silently and quietly, maybe some programs become defunded. So, and that is more dangerous, I would argue, because of lack of political discussion around it and lack of transparency and then public awareness of what's happening and then the consequences that these decisions, defunding decisions, might actually have. So that's the first one. The second one concerns our project on gender equality and democracy and whether people actually understand and think about gender equality and democracy as two concepts that are connected to each other. So for a long time in feminist thought, there was an argument that democracy cannot exist without gender equality. In other words, women's rights are not a policy issue that should be debated. It's a foundational issue. Without this issue, democracy, political system, what Zoe exactly said, political equality cannot exist. Because if a woman is limited in her reproductive choices, how can she go and then vote? How can she run for office? If all the labor at home is on her, and especially if she hasn't chosen, to be a mom, for instance, how is this then possible for her to then be a worker and a politician, going forward, for instance? So it's all interconnected. And for a long time, these arguments existed in what we call in the realm of political philosophy, where feminists just wrote that it's important that democracies do not naturally produce gender equality or racial equality or inclusion for that matter. It's been a fight and a very deliberate choice to include women into the political system, to give them a right to vote, for example. But in the last 30 years, there's a lot of mainstreaming of gender equality and the calls that we need, to promote gender equality at in legislation, but also in institutions. So we were thinking that maybe people also started associating democracy and gender equality. And in fact, we looked at Austria and we used representative survey data. About 1/3 of people actually do not think about democracy without also thinking about gender equality. They're co-constitutional, which was a very interesting finding in itself. 1/3 is, it might seem like it's not half, but it's a lot. It means 1/3 of society does not think about democracy without gender equality. And the third one, I'll tell you the really good one, the positive one. So it's positive in my estimation because you can do something about it, and it's more reassuring about the path forward, I would argue. We ran some survey questions on how people not only think about, say, gender equality and discrimination and feminism, but we also ask how they think that their fellow citizens think about the same questions. I'll give you an example. The first example, for instance, was the question, do women possess necessary skills and qualities to be in political office, for example? And then people answer the question themselves, like, do I believe that women can do it? Cool, yes. I say I agree. And then people who disagree would say I disagree. But then there was another question that asked, okay, but how do you think people in your society, other people? And then they had to select, like, do I think it's 50% who think like that, 60%, 70%? So the findings revealed that, for example, for this particular question in Austria, only 14% of respondents in a nationally representative sample believe that women do not have necessary qualities to participate in politics. So 14% is a very low number. However, those who think that women do not have these qualities, they think that 60% of Austrians think like them, when the real number is 14. So they are overestimating how many, how many of their fellow citizens share in this sexist, for instance, opinion. And we can call it sexist because, again, it's prejudiced against women. And what it does for us, and then there are a number of other questions that have similar results, where there's a minority in every society except Poland, where we ask these questions like sexist and questions about opposition to gender equality, for instance, and feminism. The minority usually thinks that it's not okay to have gender equality, but then they overestimate how many of their compatriots think like that. And what it creates, usually, these voices appear to also be the loudest online, and then they create this effect of creating a new reality where other people who might not be as vocal or as politically engaged, they would think, oh, I might be thinking that I disagree with the sexist stereotype, but maybe they're saying everybody believes. So our answer is not everybody believes, actually the minority believes, and part of then educational outreach is about informing people that you're not alone if you don't hold sexist stereotypes and if you don't hold if you're not opposing to gender equality. So this is why I think it's a reassuring finding. So I'll stop here.
What I don't understand, because I see that it's so positive and people can understand that there's no disequality, and the percentage is so low, the people that think that it's not. The equality process, it's so low, and report said that it's like over 130 years to arrive to this equality. Why it's that slow? Why?
To reach parity.
Yeah.
So it will take. I mean, I don't know. You want to
No,
continue?
I think you can start because it's a different question slightly. Because what we looked at is generally public opinion.
Okay.
But public opinion, we're making a lot of assumptions, right? From where we start in a public opinion as voters, right? To how decisions that guide the life of all of us, right? Political decisions are made. And there are a lot of steps in between. So from a person who doesn't believe in sexism or is not sexist, they need to go through a lot of steps of at least go and vote for the candidate that best represents them, who is also not sexist, right? But we also see that sexist candidates, with the example of the United States, do not deter people from voting for them, right? So they need to go vote. Then these candidates, when they work with parties in parliamentary systems, they need to create coalitions, and these coalitions then usually, again, don't prioritize gender equality unless there's a strong push. Then there's a lot of negotiation. And then when the legislation, say, passed, as we mentioned previously, right, implementation is another huge issue. And it's a cycle. And now imagine, because we don't have gender parity in any area, regardless, even in countries that have been working for a long time to have gender equal societies like Northern Europe. So what we end up with seeing, we end up seeing that you need to do a lot of small steps across the board, from women's health to work-life balance to science and women in science, women in the labor market. And usually also it's interesting, sometimes the mechanisms that drive the implementation of legislation in one area might not necessarily be the same as in another. So it's almost like you're starting from scratch, and this is where advocacy groups do a lot, especially those who advocate, again, for a change. But it's a lot of work, and they're also under-resourced, and as we see more and more becoming underfunded. So, and a bigger question, how do we mobilize people, right? People who might hold a sexist belief, but who might not hold a sexist belief, but how do we get them involved? And that brings us actually to another finding, which is not as positive, I would think. We haven't found a universal strategy where we can tell people, okay, what do you do when you see a sexist comment online? The answer is there's a variation of things that you can do, like from humor to openly calling this comment sexist. But there's our experimental evidence shows that there's a huge variation when and under what conditions these different strategies, work. And then what happens when you act as a person, just wants to respond to a sexist comment, you're not going to be thinking about, under what conditions, what works, because it's not universal. So it complicates things. Good news is that you still need to call it out, because what our research shows, you're really writing and speaking for bystanders. By sometimes saying that it's not okay, even if you can't do anything. But please, we always say you need to be safe, because sometimes it might not be a safe environment to call something outright as sexist. But whenever you can, online or offline, just pointing out and saying, you're being sexist, or this is sexist, or this is racist, and that's not okay, is enough.
So back to the question about the 130 years.
Yeah. I mean, I really like the answer, because it was not, as you said, it was not related, but it was slightly related, and like this we can understand. But no.
Because this is so. Vera spoke about public opinion, and it's very important because political parties that are really very, very powerful actors, if they want to pursue policies for gender equality, for gender equal politics, economics, and a gender equal society, these are the ones to do it, right? They are the ones who get elected and vote for legislation in parliament, that they are in government. So these are the actors in democracies. So we know from politics and gender research that there are different types of barriers that women face. There are the structural barriers. So Vera mentioned earlier the work that is being done in the household. So there is childcare, care for the elderly, or for any other like member of the family that needs care, and household chores that are, according to the statistics, more shouldered by women than by men. I mean, it is really puzzling because, as I said earlier, fathers that spend time with their children are happier fathers. So we would want all men to be happy. So it is really something that is overcoming some outdated social models. Also, the research shows that it is in the benefit of children to spend time with their fathers. So in Sweden, where there was the first country that gave parental leave to fathers, they were able to compare. They were studying kids that spent time only with the mother and kids that also spent time with the father, and they saw really differences with the kids that spend time also with the father, having developed more skills and competencies in connecting to others, and so it is beneficial. So, you know, like we really need to take into account scientific evidence if we want to improve society. Because, I mean, like all scientific fields, you know, we create knowledge, we update what we knew, and we move on as a society. Our technologies and everything is improving. So we really need to take this into account, because this is about the health and well-being of people, of men, women, and children, of all human beings. So first, the structural barrier, how do you solve it? You need to have institutions of care, daycare, not only for children, but also for the elderly. We are an aging society. There are a lot of diseases that appear now because people are living longer. So we need this care to be distributed equally across members of this society. Then there are also other types of barriers that are not visible. You know, you've heard the term glass ceiling, which is a very known concept about women in organizations. So they move on, you know, they work and they advance, but at some point there is a point where they cannot get up, but it's not visible. So that's why it's called glass ceiling, because you don't see it, but there is a ceiling. You cannot go further. So there are a lot of factors. There are stereotypes, prejudices that we have inside us. And I'm not saying that it's like only men who have it, also women have them. We are raised with some models that, as I said, are not just outdated, they're unhealthy for society. But we have seen, and even if we are aware and we've read and we know the evidence, still we have seen a lot of behaviors which we are then, you know, that we use this information we have in our brain stored to evaluate new situations. So often, without even wanting it, research shows very clearly, decades of research, especially in the field of psychology, that there is a bias. So like, just to give you an example, an experiment with identical CVs and the only thing that differs is the name. So it can be John and Joanna or Johan and Johanna. Systematically, Johan gets the job. So this has been decades of research. So there is no other factor except gender that can explain this success. But then, of course, we ask, but why is gender actually relevant? Shouldn't it be the merit? Shouldn't it be the qualifications of people? So, in fact, gender studies has shown that the qualifications of people are evaluated in ways that there is this bias, you know, sneaking in our evaluation, and we evaluate women and men differently based on different criteria. There is other experiments where you have online courses, you never see the teachers, but one has a female name and the other one has a male name. And it might even be like, you know, they might have exchanged places, but systematically the female name gets evaluated on the basis of personal characteristics and personality. But the male name gets evaluated based on competence and skill. So very different. So we know that. We need, however, to take it into account in every single evaluation we do. Evaluation of performance at schools, at work, everything. Like one of the solutions for the musicians, because you know that there were no women in orchestras, right? So the conventional wisdom was that women are not so good in music, right? So there's a gender, deficit there. Well, in fact, the solution was, and of course it cannot happen in every profession, but that's a very powerful image. So they did the auditions behind, a paravan. So you would not see whether it's a man or a woman who's playing the music. So the moment you would not see, suddenly the orchestras, were full of women, because women could play very good music, but the way they were evaluated was very different. So we cannot do this in every job, but this example of the auditions for the orchestras shows us how deeply this bias is nested and why we need to be aware of it. I have it, you have it, Vera has it. So we need to be aware of it, because only if we're aware and we accept that we have it, can we try to reach, decisions, to have evaluations that are actually not contaminated by this bias that is actually leading us to unjust outcomes. Because, of course, gender should not matter, right? It should be irrelevant, but it's not. Unfortunately, it's not.
Yeah, it's in other fields you said maybe not in all of them, but also I was thinking in actors and so on, it happens the same. Now, well, I'm from Spain, and it was like a topic that there's no papers for women about like 50 years old and plus, and they write for men older. I mean, a lot of famous actors that not even in Spain, like in the US and so on, like that they are old and they have a lot of papers, but women you stop. So it's in all the fields, maybe, I assume. We need to fight, but we don't think. I mean, I'm saying this now, I didn't study gender studies, but because someone put it, otherwise you don't think it until someone tells you, and it's when you start, and it's like when society needs to start to think. Otherwise, if no one studies, no one put it in the table and no one realized it, I think.
I mean, look, for me, once upon a time, people thought that the earth is square, right? And when someone said it's not, it was terrible. So there was huge resistance. So it's the same with gender studies. Like, people do not want to accept this evidence. But eventually, we really need to accept the evidence and do something about it, because denying the evidence, which is exactly what is happening in many parts of the world, like in the US right now, where you are not even allowed to use the word gender in science, what is it? It's like, I want to go back to that world where they felt privileged, but however, I'm saying this has been oppressing for men too. So we need to liberate all human beings from these boxes that are actually, first, we don't use talent, we use gender as a criteria, right? So it's not about quality, it's not about competence, it's about gender. This is, and how do we know about it? Because in Sweden, when they use zipper lists, which are also used here in Austria by some parties, to increase the representation of women in the Social Democratic Party, they wanted to see whether, actually, by putting more women, whether the level of qualification is decreasing, because this is the classic argument against quotas, because we assume that there's no gender bias and that is about merit, but it's not the case. It has been proven, there's like millions of studies proving that. Not accepting it is ideological. So if, you want to create policy based on science and based on, evidence, you need to accept what they found. The study is called The Crisis of the Mediocre Man. Why? Because what happens when you put more women was that where you put more women, the level of qualifications of the men was raised, because it was both women and men that stayed in the competition were really competent. So what happened was that the mediocre man was pushed out of the competition, and the mediocre man is scared. So the mediocre man is now trying to stop progress, because the mediocre man has had access to power, to ruling organization. But do we really want to be ruled by mediocre people, be they men or women? No, we don't. So if we want to work on, improving, universities, politics, society, we really need to take this evidence into account. Otherwise, we are basically locking talents in sectors where they cannot, use all the genius they have, and we are having other people in the wrong position. So, like if you have a meritocratic approach, you can have better results. But in order to have a meritocratic approach, you need to take into account that there is gender bias and racial bias and a lot of other bias that you really need to take into account and make sure that they do not contaminate decisions, especially in positions of power, like, leadership of universities, of banks. So we know that, for example, networks play a role in this decision making, and often, and that's where corruption comes in. If you rely on networks only and not on people's CVs and qualifications, then you're on the towards corruption. You're going towards corruption. But if you want to have more clean processes, transparent processes, so quotas, for example, when they entered and they somehow made the whole nomination procedure in political parties more transparent, because you had to show, like, how did you get there, And because these first quota women were very stigmatized, because they were, that was their ticket into this institution. But actually, they had to be like 10 times more qualified in order to even be considered. So it's changing, but there's also, as I said, there is this mediocre backlash, because it is true that the competition is rising when you have women in the labor market, in academia, of course, because these are jobs. And in the past, it was only men in the public sphere, women in the private sphere. So there was only one group that was participating in the market. So now it's more, and of course, competition is higher. But instead of lowering the qualifications, the inclusion of women is actually making it harder to succeed if you don't have the qualifications.
Okay, now we will swipe to the topic of women in politics. And the first question is super related with this, and I think that you already answered it, but I will ask it anyway, because I think that it's too important to punctualize that by the United Nations globally, women make only about the 27% of national parliament members. So why it's so low? Because you talk about this quota, but anyway, it's so low, 27%.
It's very low because it's but this is the number. This is the typical number.
Okay.
Also at the university we have 30% female professors. So it's like somehow you get stuck at the 30% because then they say, okay, now they're enough. And there's no more effort to go to 50. Some try, but no nation has ever reached, except Rwanda, where you have little quotas.
Yeah.
So quotas is the solution. Spain also increased a lot female representation in parliament through quotas. It's a tested measure, and so for those that worry that quotas are working against meritocracy, the news is don't worry. It does exactly the opposite, and it is a fast-track measure. And if you don't like, framing it like in terms of underrepresentation, there is also another argument, we also need to regulate overrepresentation. We don't want also overrepresentation of women in one sector, right? We want balanced sectors. For example, for me, as a mother, when I was taking my child to kindergarten, and for a couple of years there was no male person in the group that were taking care of our kids. So I didn't think that was good, because I thought, kids should have both, female and male models around them. So there is now in our kindergarten and daycare, and it is great, because this is, the reality that kids need input by different people. So if sectors are feminized, or they're very, male or female, so this is called gender segregation, this is not healthy. Because also you don't have the different perspectives. In general, when you have like this very similar type of people, like monoculture, you cannot have innovation. You really need this a little bit of diversity, different perspectives, exchange, in order to get to better outcomes. Because if you want to get stuck to the same, you can just recruit the same, type of people. But you're not going to have any evolution, any development, any, breakthrough. So back to your 27%, it is a sad number for us. I mean, for a little bit older, it looks like an achievement. I think for the younger generation, it looks like a puzzle. Why? Why is it so? So you need to tackle all those factors, the bias, which is the invisible. Like, for example, what is our definition of good leadership? Why, don't we actually promote women in politics? Because we think that women are great in running a household and taking care of kids, but not in running politics. So to all those who think that way, I would like to ask them, if somebody cannot run a household and cannot spend time with kids, can they really run a country? I don't think so. And this is a little bit what we're having now. We have like these people that have not had any of these experiences, and we have a lot of war, we have a lot of destruction of the environment, because we have people in leadership that are unable to think of the future generations, to think of what is good for more people than themselves. So what you learn in these, more feminized sectors is the care. So I'm not saying that women are natural carers. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they're socialized into it. So if we're socialized into it, then men can be socialized to care, which is, I think, something that everybody should be able to do as a human being. So not being able to care for another human being is a deficit.
Yeah,
I think.
But also it's why I think that it's so important, the gender studies, because like, for example, there's about this care thing. I know about people, a lot of people, maybe not, but people that wanted to be like, how it's called, au pairs, or these programs, and they were men. So it's super difficult to be a au pair or try to do one internship like in a care with kids if you are a man, because of this prejudice that we have.
Thank you for raising this point, because also like my question at the creche, at the Krabbelstube, because there was no man, and I said, why there is no man working here? And they said, there are some parents that don't want men to change the diaper of their kids. And this is now the reverse prejudice, that men are pedophiles, that men cannot, see a baby as it is, which is, a completely helpless human being that just needs care and love. So I don't agree. I think that men are also able to care, because it's part of being human. So I think men are human too. So, you cannot think of men as unable to, which is, I think that's the problem, that we think of men as unable to deal with human beings.
But because I mean, sorry, but I don't understand about this, so maybe I do a mistake, but because as a society we grew with this idea.
Yeah.
So for example, I was watching an interview the other day that a man was talking about he had a kid with one girl, and he was saying, no, I do this and I do this household and I do like this. And okay, it's the normal thing that everyone needs to understand. And I was like, well, it's not the normal thing that I see. You know what I mean? It's like, it's what I wish that it was the normal, but it calls you the attention. I mean, it's like calls you when someone says something like this, and it shouldn't be. It should be normal. But as long as it's not happening like always, we are like, oh wow, this can be. So we need to break with this stigma. But we grew with this, so that's why maybe it's difficult. So
as I said, we just need to realize that the Earth is not square.
yeah. And that's the point of the 130 years.
But you know, it has to do also we are in Europe, we are very, and I mean, I think that's good that we love our democracies, but the democracy that was born in ancient Athens was built on this division between the private sphere and the public sphere. And to be honest, in the beginning, maybe people were not thinking that one is, that women might not be good for politics. It was maybe they needed to manage somehow their life, and they divided the labor, right? So the problem is that in democracy, the ones who had the right to participate but did not, the ones that are focused on private affairs in Greek, in ancient Greek and in modern Greek, the private is idiotis. Mm-hmm. So the word that they use, so for someone who was focusing on idiotica, private affairs, it was derogatory because if you had the right to participate in democracy and you didn't do it, you were like stupid. Mm-hmm. Like, why would you never exercise your right if you can co-decide what is happening with your fate? Mm-hmm. Like, why wouldn't you do that? You must be an idiot. So in modern Greek and in ancient Greek, idiotis means a private person. But in every other language in the world, it means stupid. Mm-hmm. So it comes from this. So the people that had the right to participate but didn't, they were idiots, right? Mm-hmm. But who was in the private sphere? They didn't have the right to participate, but they were in the private sphere. So they were in this devalued sphere. Because in democracy, it's all about the common affairs. It's about collective, co-deciding. Because it's a revolutionary regime where suddenly the many are given the chance to deliberate and co-decide. Because in the past, it was, one person, two persons, like monarchy, oligarchy. So democracy is a beautiful, beautiful idea. Mm-hmm. But it was built on a division between the private and the public. So it took us thousands of years to overcome this division, which actually had given men the time. Mm-hmm. Because someone else was taking care of the kids, they could do politics. But gender studies and politics and gender showed that actually the earth was not square, and it was not a great division in terms of outcomes. Mm-hmm. And that's how societies evolve. You have the evidence, you take it into account, you create policies to cure the problem. Because it's a problem when you're recruiting mediocre people because of their gender, mm-hmm. and not, because of their qualifications. Mm-hmm. It is a problem. It's a disease. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Sorry, I went out of the topic. But returning to women in politics, how it's in Austria or in Salzburg, women representation in politics?
So in the national parliament, at the federal level, it's much better than, so the lower you go, the worse it gets. Okay. So we have a project about this, why don't we have mayors? So one of the answers is that there is no parental leave. So politics is a job that doesn't even have parental leave. So it is conceived, surprise, surprise, without those that do the care. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And thousands of years later, it's still not changing. We're not changing our concept of politics. What is politics? Some parliamentarians took their babies into the parliament because it has to become normal that you have children and that you need to take care of them. So, children are always like hidden somewhere, that we never see them. We don't talk about them at work. As if, it's some deficit. Why? Because we know there is evidence that there is the motherhood penalty, that mothers are penalized, they're getting worse salaries because they're assumed to be less committed, because the expectation is that they have to prioritize their kids and not their job, as if you cannot do, both well. This is also an assumption that. So back to Salzburg politics, you have to either have older kids or you have small kids and you have a network of support. What I said before, you need childcare institutions or relatives. Above all, you need a partner that does their share. And it's not on you, because if the assumption is that, as a mother, you need to do 80% of the childcare, you cannot go into politics. It's impossible. But if we assume that parents are equally responsible for kids and for their well-being, then we would have to create politics that allows men to take care of their kids and women alike. So, but because there was this division, they had never thought about it. So this is one of the findings of this project, is that the balance between family life and working life, which is no surprise because it's also in other sectors. In our job, it's the same. The ideal academic is a person, like the ideal politician. They work around the clock. They're mobile, they can travel tomorrow, yesterday. They pick up the phone all the time. So they're constantly, on duty because there's an assumption that if these people, either they're single or they have someone taking care of their kids. So a lot of jobs, especially leadership positions like professorships and politicians, are built around these wrong assumptions. That, because actually you don't become more productive if you work around the clock. I mean, this is also another, scientific finding, But going back to Salzburg, stereotypes have been, so we had qualitative interviews with politicians from all different parties, different ages, and they say very similar things, that it was work-life balance, very important, and they're asked, for example, when they're in parliament, who is with your kids? So, of course, they are getting questions that their male counterparts do not get, because the assumption is that they should not be there, they should be somewhere else. So it is a process, and I think these politicians are also a role model for all of us, because they go, they navigate very hostile environments, because women in politics, they have a hard way getting in, and also they have a hard way staying, because they are, as I said, judged based on different criteria. Like, for example, the outfits. Like, rarely we have this, that a man would be torn apart by the media because of some, I don't know, a sock or a hairstyle. But with women, this is like as if, women are so evaluated based on their appearance instead of what they're saying and what they're doing. So they have a lot more fronts to fight. It's discouraging, but these women are the hope, because they're giving us their stories and how they, manage to pull through and succeed. They talk about networks, they talk about support, they talk about how they dealt with, insecurities and stereotypes. So we're trying to see, whether we're analyzing the data still, so we're trying to see whether there are some, key messages and patterns across parties. But one powerful message is to the ones that are in politics now, is that if they want women in politics, they need to fight stereotypes, and they need to think of leadership, rethink leadership, and actually redefine it by using different criteria. So being aggressive, not, imposing yourself. And what we thought, were the key characteristics of a leader may not be the best, qualities for having like really good, high quality politics that solves, because what is politics? It's about solving problems of society. So what we're seeing right now, like all this aggression in the world and war instead of, negotiations and cooperation, is like an outburst of anger of this kind of men that maybe are scared because their time is gone. We have a lot of evidence that this is not good leadership and that this is, and this is not sustainable. At least if we want the planet to survive, we really need different leaders. We know, for example, especially on the climate issue, that when you include women in the negotiations, you get stricter agreements and they are implemented. So when women are in environmental ministers, you get better deals and they're enforced. So there's a difference. Women make a difference. So if we want good politics, we really need to reach that 50%.
So without the data done of the project yet, the steps that can take to improve the women's participation, it should be this. Do you think that it should be these two that you mentioned? No?
I would add one more.
Yes.
And just from the perspective of political socialization and actually gender socialization. So I study both, how people socialize into gender role attitudes primarily, but also how people develop political attitudes. And surprisingly, the scholarship kind of developed into parallel. And I'm trying to connect both. And if anything, it's very important to have women from very early on develop this sense of self-efficacy. It's one of the strongest predictors of engagement, political engagement, where you will then, self-efficacy, all it means is that this I can do attitude that can get you through a lot of barriers, and it will help you to keep going. It's one thing. Another thing is, surprisingly, I'm thinking like parental warmth, but it's general for political engagement. It's important that parents practice very, we call it authoritative parenting, democratic parenting, but the parenting is very attentive to the needs of the children, both boys and girls, because this is what will make them then more committed to all the pro-social values, something that we value high, and including the values of liberal democracy. So a lot of it starts in the family, but then is reinforced in school systems. So if, say, you're not lucky with a family and how you grew up, that's okay, because we have another research in civic education where I think we need to do a lot more than just teach about democracy as, an abstract political system and the practices of democracy. I think we need, and we're not there yet, but we do know the findings that civic education can override parental socialization in some instances. What is important is to bring the gender dimension into how we teach kids to think and practice, to think about and practice democracy. So I think that will be another solution. So yes, it's great that we're trying to support existing politicians, and it's very true, there's a huge need. There's a lot of emerging research on gender-based violence against female politicians and how many of them actually leave the path of politics, and a lot of them don't even want to engage because, again, it's a lot of personal attacks, it's a lot of violence that male politicians don't experience. But leaving that aside, I think it's teaching young girls very early on, both in the family and in schools, how to do politics, build a sense of efficacy, have meetings with politicians, more internships, mentorship is another strong predictor. So connecting young girls and then teenage girls with mentors who can outline the path for them of how do you even become engaged in politics. And we don't need to think about like major member of parliament maybe at this stage, because a lot of times we recruit, locally. So you are building towards that big position as a member of parliament, for instance. So how do we connect girls, teenagers, with local politicians, local political engagement communities, so then they can practice being in the public sphere, maybe small steps, and then they hopefully become so habitual, because it's another good thing that if we practice something a lot and we practice it early on, it becomes the second nature, and then it's very hard not to do it. So I think that will be my
like with
addition.
theater.
With theater, maybe that's a good segue to talk about theater.
We're doing theater
as
at the University of Salzburg.
Development.
We are working with a political, participatory theater, Theater of the Oppressed. We have been working with Theater of the Oppressed Vienna, but now, out of the courses we did, our students are trying to found the Theater of the Oppressed Salzburg. So maybe this is the next topic for our discussion. So what is this? This is a participatory method. So it's bottom-up. Augusto Boal in Brazil, authoritarian times, was trying to somehow emancipate the masses, that were poor, but we're always like blaming the system, but we're not doing anything to change their lives. They were focused on football and, so he thought, they really need to somehow train themselves, like playfully rehearse democracy, rehearse the resistance to what they feel that is oppressing them, but also first to name it, what is it that annoys me, instead of like a general, disengagement and violence, because this is what happens. If you do not train people to democratically express, disagreement, deliberate, reach a common solution, then there is violence, there is criminality, there is like much. I talked earlier about problems for society and diseases. So once you have, these methods where people come together, they have very different understandings, men, women, old, young. But then they start understanding a little bit, how the other sees it. And the Theater of the Oppressed, for example, you could create statues and you work a lot with your own situation, but then you create a collective scene out of, a patchwork of fictionalized personal stories. And then you play it on stage. This is what we did with my students at the University of Salzburg. So you stage this, and then you allow, and that's now the genius Augusto Boal. He revolutionized theater. So in Aristotelian theater, you have the actors, the protagonists, who were aristocrats, and then you have the chorus, who were the masses, but we're speaking with one voice, like a lot of persons with one voice. And now he breaks this hierarchy, and he allows the audience to go up and become actors. So he creates spectators, and they can intervene, and they can tell the actors what to do, or become the actors and change the plot. And this is rehearsing, he called it rehearsing the revolution. So I want to use this to rehearse democracy. So that's why, I think that, as Vera said, the earlier the better, because people need to understand that, we are a collective, we are a society. I mean, now we are very isolated, everybody's in their phone, they think that they're activists when they're just signing petitions or writing in social media. But in fact, people, and there's research for it, when they're in the same room and they're exchanging and they're doing things together, there is a different feeling when you do things together, even if you have disagreements, and then, you can reach a common solution. So this is something we need to relearn, and this collective action, because coming together, presenting a problem, so the scene is always ending with a problem, so you need to have some intervention to solve it. And there are different types of interventions. So you see different types of proposals. You might not have, you might not think about this, but then somebody else comes and says, you could do this, I would do this. And then you see that actually it's also like working together first of all, expressing the problem, putting it on the agenda, deliberating about possible solutions, and then solving. And he used this theater. He was elected in the city council in Rio de Janeiro. And he used this theater to get topics and solutions from the people, and then he brought them into real politics. Laws were made out of this process. So we're doing it with the students. I think it can be done also with children. In order for them to learn, like this problem-solving capacity, but also playfully, representing on stage your problems. So instead of oppressing them and being disengaged and hating the world, you do something about it. It's on stage. And now that's the hypothesis. If you do it playfully within the realm of art and theater, your body has done it once. So the likelihood that you will do it outside in the real world is higher. This is the hypothesis I'm testing.
It's perfect, because I wanted to close already like the conversation, and I wanted to ask if there's something that I didn't ask and you want to mention, but I would like to close, if you don't need to say something like that I didn't ask, I would like to close with this topic. If you can explain me more about this hypothesis or about this project of the theater with the students, how it comes.
So the theater, it was part of the Pushback Clash, and with Vera we are working on research articles on it, but also, so where it is, it's very powerful also as a teaching method. So it is useful in education, and we are trying also through research to improve, to see like how it works with the students. I mean, I can tell you that after the first, some of the participants came to the second, and now they want to found a theater of the oppressed Salzburg. So for me, this is already empowerment enough. And this group that wants to found the theater is a mixed group.
Great.
Men and women from different countries and backgrounds, they want to work together. And, because otherwise you're alone, you're helpless, frustrated, in the negative spiral. I cannot do anything, the world is being destroyed. But then if you're there and you're playing and you're exchanging, you feel more powerful, like because you're together with others and you think that something can be done. Even like a small thing that you could change is important. It's better than nothing. So like this, trying to also visualize different developments of the story, I think that using our imagination to envisage a different world is very important. And like the way I said, the world is not, the planet is not square. Somebody, once upon a time, imagined it might be, a round, planet. So, and then they started to collect observations. So now we have this with gender equality. Like we have reached a point where we have enough evidence to accept that the planet is not square. So the theater is, I think, one of the methods to embrace also different members that were not so much interested in it. Like one of the courses we had was about men, how to include men. So we addressed men, they came, and it was very interesting because you had very different perspectives. And you really need to get also their perspective in order to achieve equality, because equality involves them too.
Yeah.
So it's impossible, to achieve it without them.
Okay, thank you very much for being here in BEM. I know that there's a lot of way to go still, and we need to work for this equality, that it will take, I hope, that less than it expected. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And to all our viewers, thank you for watching BEM in FS Science. Thanks, and see you in the next episode.